What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review James Gray's new movie, Ad Astra, starring Brad Pitt. I got into an advanced screening earlier today, and I realized this movie's not coming out until late next week, so don't worry. I won't say a word about spoilers until the very end of the review, and then I'll give you a big fat fair warning. But the movie already played at the Venice Film Festival a few days ago, so the spoilers are starting to slowly leak out onto the internet, so be careful if that is a concern to you. But what was cool about this particular screening, they had astronaut Mike Massimino introduce the movie. He teaches here in New York at Columbia, and he's been into space a few times. He worked on the Hubble telescope, and he has the distinction of being the very first astronaut to tweet from space. But it was interesting hearing him talking about his adventures and how he went from feeling like he was a New Yorker because he grew up on Long Island to when he joined the space program feeling like he was an American and eventually feeling as if he was just a citizen of the planet Earth once he had a chance to see the planet Earth from space. And he basically just wanted to emphasize that the Earth is a big, beautiful blue marble and that we need to take care of it because he's been to space and what he's seen is that there's not a lot of available real estate out there. And when asked about movies that he likes about the space program, he replied that The Right Stuff was his go-to and it was one of the movies that really inspired him to become an astronaut. In any event, getting to the film Ad Astra, in Latin, Ad Astra means to the stars, which is very appropriate for this sci-fi movie that is set largely in space. But I'm relatively new to the films of James Gray, but I've been getting up to speed on his films recently because we're planning a big James Gray episode of my podcast, Wrong Reel, in the near future. So far, I've only seen Lost City of Z and Ad Astra, and I've heard people describe him as a classicist. I don't know how accurate that is or not because I'm just not that familiar with his full body of work. But what I guess people mean is that he doesn't do superhero movies. He doesn't do big franchises. Instead, he has the ambition of classic directors, guys like David Lean or Francis Ford Coppola, the kind of directors who knew that making a hit and making a classic were not mutually exclusive. So from what I've seen, James Gray obviously is a director of soaring ambition. Whether or not he'll succeed at becoming another David Lean or Francis Ford Coppola, only history will be able to tell us. But the comparison to Coppola is interesting because much like Coppola's film Apocalypse Now has a Vietnam adaptation of Joseph Campbell's novel Heart of Darkness, there's a lot about Ad Astra that feels like a sci-fi adaptation of Heart of Darkness. In terms of overall tone and atmosphere, and just approach to the story, there's a ton of common ground when it comes to the use of voiceover, the depiction of people living in total isolation on the fringes of civilization, where madness and death potentially lurk around every corner. So if you've seen the trailer, you know the premise, but for those of you who don't know the premise, it's set in the not-so-distant future when we've started colonizing the solar system, but mankind's still at war with a lot of precious resources, and they're always looking for signs of intelligent life, which years ago led to this mission out to Neptune, led by Tommy Lee Jones, the father of the character played by Brad Pitt. And as they explain in the trailer, there are all these mysterious surges or signals or like cosmic rays now coming from Neptune, and they're not entirely sure why, but what they are sure of is that these surges are having a horrible impact on any and all technology throughout the solar system, essentially threatening the end of all of human civilization. So now Brad Pitt, who's got a ton of experience exploring space, he's been asked to travel out to Mars to try to communicate with his father and see what the hell is happening. But it's incredible to me just how good a year Brad Pitt is having. I prefer Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but he is incredible in this movie as well. His character is so low-key and so understated. He's kind of the king of cool, and he's perfectly suited to these high-stress situations because his heart rate never really gets accelerated, never goes above 80 beats per minute, even if he's falling out of the sky like you see in the trailer. And much like his father before him, he's one of those guys who's put everything into his work, often at the expense of his personal life, meaningful relationships, but consequently, he's become very good at what he does. But apart from this movie being set in the future, it's kind of hard to describe this movie as science fiction because the overall approach is incredibly grounded. And admittedly, it's been a long time since I've taken any science classes, but the movie places an emphasis on hard science and problem solving, at least to the degree that I can ascertain. But what really makes this movie work overall is the style. James Gray has this incredible eye, and he knows how to tell his stories visually in jaw-dropping, oftentimes beautiful fashion. And some of the images of the planets in our solar system, they're shots that I'm never going to forget. For most of this movie, I was in an almost trance-like state, totally spellbound by the overall aesthetic of the film, but I should caution that this movie is not for everybody. I heard snores in the audience, one right behind me. This guy was really struggling to get through it, and as the movie ended and people were leaving the theater, I heard a lot of really heated arguments between people who just were enthralled by the movie and people who wanted to see more action or it just wasn't for them. But what I can safely say is I think there are a lot of people out there who are going to want to linger in this world a little longer. It's unlike any other movie you're going to see this year, and at only 2 hours and 2 minutes, the movie feels really lean and economical in a very satisfying way. And I've already heard a lot of people starting to talk about how this might be Brad Pitt's year to walk home with a little Oscar gold. And I would much prefer to see him nominated for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I think it's a much richer character, but the character here is incredible as well. And perhaps Ad Astra might be slightly more accessible because it has just fewer rough edges, and also because this movie quite literally will hold a lot of audience members under its spell. So if the trailer appeals to you at all, I strongly encourage people to go see this movie. It's just one of those movies where you're reminded that the art of filmmaking is not dead. That going to the movies is not just about the latest Pixar movie or the latest Marvel movie or the latest Star Wars movie. There are still storytellers out there with grand ambition who tell stories in a cinematic way and have complete and total command over the language of cinema to deliver these incredibly satisfying experiences. But that's about as much as I can say without giving away spoilers, so I do want to talk about one or two quick details before I wrap things up. So if you don't like spoilers, bail out now. But as I mentioned before, this movie has a ton in common with Heart of Darkness, where each station along the way in the journey of the protagonist gets a little darker, a little bleaker, more confusing. And I thought James Gray just nailed these different stops along the way. I love this giant scene on the moon where the moon has almost become like what it's like to travel the ocean in the 17 and 1800s, where you had different nations at war and pirates were running amok, because now on the moon, you basically can't travel anywhere with pirates trying to take all your stuff. And there's this great, strange, not high-speed car chase, but like a low-speed car chase between a bunch of different moon buggies shooting at each other as Brad Pitt and his allies are trying to get to the dark side of the moon. And the transition from the sun to the dark side of the moon was just so beautiful. And I love how Brad Pitt's character truly is one of those strong, silent types where he's really good at what he does and he doesn't talk about it a lot. He just does things. Like at one point when he's in a rocket about to land on Mars, they're coming in at a bad angle and they're basically going to crash. And the guy who's supposed to be in charge of landing the vehicle is having a complete, total meltdown and panic attack. And Brad Pitt very calmly and very carefully just takes over and lands it. And then he doesn't say a word about it to anybody because it was just the job that needed doing at that particular moment. But what's really cool seeing how Tommy Lee Jones's character is this crazy extreme extension of Brad Pitt's character, because they have a ton of common ground, but Tommy Lee Jones, his character, is completely disconnected. He doesn't regard the Earth as his home. He regards his ship and his mission as home. And he's been living in total isolation for years because all of his fellow crew members, they wanted to go home, and slowly but surely he had to fight them and or kill them in order to stick to his mission of looking for intelligent life. And the great irony is that he has been successful in his mission of trying to determine whether or not there's any intelligent life in their immediate galaxy. And the answer is there's none, which is very depressing and very bleak. And Tommy Lee Jones' character, he's very spiritual. And he just can't accept it. He just wants to keep going further and further and further into the blackness, hoping to find what he seeks. And that might be my one complaint about the story, is that the ending is so clear-cut and it's so resolute, and it doesn't leave anything open to doubt. And I like a movie like 2001 where there's a lot of ambiguity, a lot of abstract ideas, a lot of mystery, and just something truly cosmic and awe-inspiring, whereas Ad Astra perhaps has a little bit too neat of a bow on the end. I was just hoping for something a little bit more profound, something like Aliens or something like transcending to a new evolutionary state. But basically the message of this movie is all we have is each other, and through thick and thin, we're gonna have to stick together and solve our problems, because we're not gonna find some deity or alien race that's gonna swoop in and solve all of our problems for us. So it's a great cautionary tale about ambition run amok and how you do need to be grounded in it. You do need to have relationships, and you do need to be a part of society, or you can just become this crazed, psychotic individual living on the edge of space. So I really enjoyed this movie. I thought it was an overall just excellent movie-going experience, but I would fall just shy of saying it belongs in that same hallowed hall of movies like David Lean and Francis Ford Coppola. Once again, I have not finished at all studying the filmography of James Gray, so for me the jury's still out on how he measures up. So I really like what I've seen from his career so far, but I'm going to have to do a lot more homework before I have any real solid, concrete feelings about how I rank James Gray in comparison to some of the other great epic directors of the past. But as I said before, I strongly recommend the movie. I think a lot of people are going to really enjoy it. And if you want to talk more about sci-fi or Brad Pitt or James Gray or David Lean or any of the above mentioned topics, you can always find me on Twitter at Colbrex. I'm there day and night talking about movies. But if you enjoyed this review, please consider hitting the like button, subscribing to the channel. I would really appreciate it. New York Film Festival is right around the corner, so there'll be a lot of movie reviews coming your way. But I can't thank you enough for watching the video. I appreciate the support, but more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.